Mr. Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, well, contrary to popular belief, I do always look at the mirror in the morning, and I think on this occasion I'm reasonably well prepared for this occasion. I'm about to deliver the real budget statement. And I think this is positively my last appearance in the House in a speaking capacity in the course of this week, or so at the moment I expect it to be. But Mr. Deputy Speaker, the British economy is today prosperous and successful, and this budget has got to make it even more prosperous and an even bigger success over the coming years. And when I presented my first budget in 1993, it was against a very different economic background from today. Although the recovery had begun then, consumer confidence hadn't yet returned. Growth wasn't yet firmly established. Further firm action was needed on the public finances, and our critics in 1993 were peddling doom and gloom about the British economy. Recovery is now in its fifth year. Consumer confidence has returned, and we're achieving something unprecedented for a generation in this country: growth with low inflation and without a widening trade gap. But one thing hasn't changed in 1996. Our critics are still peddling doom and gloom. In fact, with all their predictions of impending disaster, it's obvious that there's probably more than one Cassandra lurking in the Labour Party.
Reference to a Labour critic.
In my first two budgets, I curbed the growth of public spending, and I took firm decisions on tax, which have brought borrowing down by almost half since 1993. Last year, in my third budget, I was able to return to cutting tax while spending more on the public services, which people I know care about most: health, schools, and the police, and keeping borrowing on a firm downward path. This year, I'm presenting a budget which builds on the last three. This budget reduces public spending plans further, while providing more money for priority services. It makes responsible progress on our tax-cutting agenda, while getting borrowing down faster. This isn't a reckless budget on either tax or spending. The run-up to Christmas, I'm not going to play Santa Claus, but this year, I don't have to play Scrooge either. But I have... I have one overriding aim, which is the lasting health of the British economy. Oh, yes, and the lasting health of the British economy might win elections. That is true. But my first aim is the lasting health of the British economy. And we're securing that by creating the best conditions for British businesses and British men and women to earn a living. All my budgets and all my policies have been designed to set this country on course to be the strongest industrial economy in Western Europe in years to come. The British economy, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is in its fifth successive year of steady, healthy economic growth, with falling unemployment and low inflation. These are the best circumstances we've faced for a generation. It's the only sensible background to debate in this House. It's a Rolls-Royce recovery, and it's built to last. The IMF and the OECD confidently expect the United Kingdom to be the fastest growing major European economy again next year. And by next year, we'll have grown faster than either France or Germany for 5 years in succession for the first time in half a century. And this time, unlike so many previous recoveries that many of us remember, healthy growth's been accompanied by the best inflation performance for nearly 50 years. And restrained growth of earnings has been good news for jobs. The British labour market has become our flexible friend. Employment began to rise sooner, and unemployment began to fall sooner than in the previous recovery. Growth creates jobs quicker so long as we retain a flexible labour market. The OECD have praised us for having one of the least regulated labour markets in the industrialised world. High social overheads, minimum wages and unnecessary legislation don't protect workers. They actually cost jobs. Unemployment is still rising in France, and unemployment is still rising in Germany. It's fallen sharply here to its lowest level for over 5.5 years. And in the bad old days, recoveries were derailed by balance of payments crises. In this recovery, the current account has actually improved despite the slowdown in our main European markets. In fact, we now have a current account broadly in balance, which is our best overall trading performance for nearly 10 years. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I want to ask the British people in the years ahead, do we seriously want to be prosperous in this country? I think we do. That's why I'm setting out an economic policy aimed at the next 5 years, not just the next 5 months. I'm setting out an economic policy that will go on delivering our enviable combination of rising prosperity, low inflation, and more jobs. That's my purpose in this budget. This budget secures a prosperous future for all sections of our people and their families. And the last thing the British economy needs now is a change of direction. We need at least another 5 years of this government's continuous vigilance on inflation. We need more of this government's determination to get government borrowing down. We need another 5 years of this government's commitment to raise the wealth-creating potential of the British economy by improving incentives, reducing the role of the state, and creating a climate for enterprise. So let me begin by turning to my forecast for growth. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I expect the British economy to grow by 2.5% this year and 3.5% next year, and there are a few serious commentators who would disagree with me. I hear mutterings from the Shadow Chancellor. There are a few serious commentators who would disagree with me. By keeping a close eye on the prospects for inflation up to 2 years out, and by taking sensible early action if and when necessary, I intend to ensure that healthy growth continues without inflationary pressures emerging. That's what I have always promised. No return to boom and bust. I expect consumers' expenditure to continue to be the main engine of growth next year. The real value of take-home pay is growing strongly. The housing market recovery is now firmly established, and I hope that negative equity can soon be consigned to the economic history books. People are feeling the improvement in their own family finances, and consumer confidence is at its highest levels for over 8 years. So I expect consumer spending to grow by 3% in 1996 as a whole, but it's been strengthening throughout this year. So I expect stronger growth to continue, with consumers' expenditure rising by over 4% next year. But this recovery isn't just about a more confident consumer. Businesses are optimistic too. The climate for business is excellent. Strong demand at home and a recovery in our key export markets present British industry and commerce with tremendous opportunities. Interest rates and tax rates remain low, and profitability is high. And the result has been business investment growth of 6% so far this year. I expect business investment to continue to grow strongly by almost 10% next year. And these excellent conditions for business aren't lost on overseas companies looking to invest for the future inside the European market. Let us never forget the most valuable practical endorsement that we get for our sound economic policies. The United Kingdom remains the #1 destination for inward investment into the European Union. And keeping our enterprise economy on course at the heart of Europe will keep us in pole position. Exports have grown, Mr. Deputy Speaker, by almost 20% over the last 2 years. And that's a very impressive performance in the face of weak demand in our key European markets. The achievement is down to our exporters, to our strong, cost-conscious British exporting companies. but they'll benefit further next year as the tentative recovery on the continent becomes more established. I expect export volumes to rise by over 7% this year and 6% next year. The current account has been close to balance during the last 2.5 years, thanks to strong growth in exports and income from our investments overseas. I expect the current account to remain broadly in balance this year and next. As I said earlier, our thriving economy, I'm glad to say, is creating jobs. Employment in the United Kingdom has risen by over 750,000 real jobs since the recovery began. Unemployment has fallen by almost 1 million from its peak, and it will soon drop through the 2 million mark. But that's still too high. We're about to go below 2 million. It's still too high. I want it to go on falling, and I expect it to go on falling. I do hope that the Shadow Chancellor is going to get up and say in the course of this debate that he forecasts that unemployment will now rise month after month. That seemed to help our performance in the labour market in this country the last time that he said it. We're on course to get underlying inflation down to our target of 2.5% or less and to keep it there. In October, underlying inflation rose to just over 3%. It shouldn't have surprised anybody who looked at last year's statistics. It's a temporary and inevitably a reflection of the quite exceptional actual falls in the price level 12 months before. But let me give the House my concrete reasons for being so confident about low inflation. Apart from oil prices, which have risen sharply, commodity prices are steady and they're not putting any upward pressure on inflation. Earnings growth in this country remains sensible and modest. Producer price inflation, which is a very good indication of what's in the pipeline for the retail price inflation, is at its lowest levels in this country since the 1960s. And producer input prices are actually lower than they were a year ago. So any risk to this recovery from inflationary pressures re-emerging remains a good way off. But as I've demonstrated, Mr. Deputy Speaker, again and again, when I see any risks, I will act. And I will continue to stay ahead of the game on monetary policy. Eddie will keep me steady, and I intend to continue to be canny, because I expect underlying inflation to meet our target of 2.5% or less. And I'll ensure that we go on meeting that target for the foreseeable future. We made good progress in reducing public sector borrowing, but that's not been as fast as I expected. This budget, therefore, targets public sector borrowing again. The general public may ask, why do I concentrate on public sector borrowing in the way that I do? Well, one reason why, somebody said it's because I'm Tory. That is a very good reason for concentrating on public sector borrowing, as I do. But one reason why I continue to concentrate so heavily on public borrowing is setting policies, because money spent paying the interest on our debt is, in my opinion, money that I prefer to spend on public services and the reduction of taxation. We are making good progress on bringing down borrowing, but lower than expected tax revenues mean that it hasn't fallen as fast as I expected in the last budget. It's not bad news for everyone. People are no doubt quite glad not to be paying as much tax as I expected. But as I am the Chancellor, I strongly prefer to keep any tax cuts under my own control. The causes of these shortfalls in our forecasts of tax revenue, primarily on value-added tax, but also on direct taxes, can't wholly be explained by any experts inside or outside the revenue departments. But there does seem to be an increasing tendency to exploit loopholes and use special reliefs in an artificial way to reduce tax bills. Those sort of tax cuts are unacceptable. On that I seem to have agreement. And if they're not tackled every year in the budget, they mean that a few people pay less tax, but the rest must pay more. In this budget, I propose quite a number of measures to stem tax leakage, to protect the ordinary taxpayer and make sure that we do get the right tax from the right people. When I do reduce tax, I want to do so in a way that's fair for all businesses and fair for all hard-working British men and women. Government borrowing has been steadily coming down for 3 years. And this budget will ensure that government borrowing keeps coming down. I expect the public sector borrowing requirement to be £26.5 billion this year. And that will mean it's halved as a share of GDP over the past 3 years. I expect it to come down to £19 billion next year and to be broadly in balance by 1999 to 2000. That pattern of declining borrowing is very much better than the one I had to put in my summer economic forecast last July. Since I produced the summer forecast, which we debated in this House last summer, I've reduced my expectations by £4 billion in my forecast for next year. And a large part of that improvement is the result of the measures that I am taking in this budget. This budget tightens fiscal policy. And the reason that I am tightening fiscal policy now is in order to reduce the risk of having to tighten monetary policy excessively as I set policy to hit my inflation target. My decisions are always taken solely in British interest to benefit the British economy. But my decisions in this budget also mean that, by happy coincidence, we will meet the Maastricht debt and deficit criteria in 1997, and will do even better than that in the medium term. No, I don't need assistance from nationalists. It is a happy coincidence for everyone, because those criteria make sound economic sense, as we all agree, with or without a single currency. And our option whether to join or stay out of a single currency based on British national interest remains a genuine choice. We will qualify, but we will choose in the next Parliament when the time comes. This government is the champion of sound public finances, of limited government, and of low taxation. And our combination of low taxation, low public spending, and low debt is the best in Europe. And we intend to stay in that enviable position, and we can only do this if we continue to bear down on public spending. Looking at public spending in the 1980s across the rest of Europe, the modern state remorselessly took an ever greater share of almost every nation's wealth on the continent. We in Britain held the line. The proportion of GDP going into government spending in the United Kingdom is now 8% lower than the average in the rest of the European Union. If our spending had risen under Conservative government to continental levels, we would now have to raise nearly £2,300 a year more in tax from every British household. Now, I've set a target of 40% or below for the share of national income that should go on public spending. Making progress towards that desirable target means tough decisions on public spending every year. This year we've had to cope with the costs of BSE. This year we've had to cope with the larger than expected increase in the costs of social security as more and more elderly and disabled people receive benefits to which they are entitled. But against this background, we had to keep the rest of public spending within the tightest possible limits in order for us to spend more on the public services that people really care about: education, combating crime, and on our National Health Service. This country has been served well by my right honourable friend, the Chief Secretary, who has successfully tackled this problem. Despite all the difficulties, in a very difficult round, we've been able to reduce public spending plans over the next 3 years by a further £7 billion in this budget. Public spending next year will be over £24 billion lower than was projected for that year when I became Chancellor, and that's a reduction of 7%. And we've been able to reduce spending plans because we have lower inflation, falling unemployment, a continuing campaign for efficiency in the public sector, and sensible policy priorities, and a government capable of taking decisions about those priorities. And on top of that, the government's relentless drive against fraud and the abuse of tax and benefits will be stepped up another gear. Next year, we are going to meet our target of 40% for the share of national income that goes on public spending. In last year's budget, I said I would make 40% in 1997 to 1998, and this year's budget secures that important goal. And so long as we keep, as the next Conservative government will keep, the growth in public spending down below the growth in the economy, we will go below that. Now, education is the key to the future of any prosperous and civilized society. Education helps to determine how well the economy performs in the long run as well. It also helps to determine the sort of citizens that we have and the sort of society that we have. This government is committed to raising standards in education. As a result of last year's budget, £878 million extra was provided for schools this year. We're giving schools priority again in this budget. Planned expenditure on schools will rise by another £830 million next year. A large proportion of this money, £633 million, which is an increase of 3.6%, will be challenged through the local authorities. I see the honourable gentleman for Sheffield Brightside shaking his head. Perhaps it didn't reach his schools. I'm not as familiar with Sheffield as he is.
Referring to David
judging
Blunkett.
by last year's experience, local authorities are reluctant to pass on the increases in their SSA to their schools. Oh, yes. Many prefer to spend the money on other areas of their choosing. Well, it's no good local authorities campaigning for more spending on education in the autumn and then spending their money on other things in the spring. Parents will want to make sure that their local authorities spend money on the things they want for their children: good teachers and better equipped schools, and I hope the honourable member for Sheffield Brightside makes the same efforts to ensure that Sheffield passes it on if they didn't last year. A good school has a value far and beyond its buildings, but the quality of school buildings in which our children are taught is still very important. We have a long way to go to get up from the post-war area to the standards we require. We will be providing an extra £50 million on top of the previously planned provision for more capital investment to improve the fabric of our schools. By setting high standards for schools and increasing choice for parents, this government's delivering better trained and better qualified young people. Almost 1 in 3 young people now go on to university, compared with 1 in 8 in 1979. And our universities and colleges maintain some of the highest standards in the world, despite the pressure on their unit costs that this unprecedented explosion of opportunity for our young people has produced. But I recognise this pressure, I have heard about these pressures, and I also realise that our universities and colleges make an important contribution to the future of the British economy. My budget therefore includes £280 million to boost further and higher education over the next 2 years. This includes an extra £20 million next year for science equipment, because we want to ensure that the British science research base remains the best in the world, which it certainly is at the present time. As the Secretary of State, as my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Education and Employment, announced in September, the government's planning a substantial sale of student loans debt. It makes no sense for the government to keep a huge portfolio of loans on its books when the private sector could manage it more effectively, and the private sector is better placed to cope with the risk. I emphasise that the sale will have no effect on the terms upon which students can get loans. The substantial reduction in the figures for education that members will find published in the new spending plans opposite the line is actually more than accounted for by the sale of this debt. As I've just described, we will actually spend more on the things that really matter: educating our children and educating our young people. This government believes that effective law and order is an essential part of making Britain a nation at ease with itself. A good quality police service and an effective system of criminal justice are very high on this list of this government's priorities. Mr. Deputy Speaker, when it comes to spending on law and order, this government's got a record as long as your arm. spending more money on a much better police service, spending more money on a much better criminal justice system. I plead guilty as charged, if that is the charge against my government, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Spending on law and order has already doubled in real terms since 1979. Provision for combating crime. Police and prisons will now rise by another £450 million next year. Our plans provide for 2,000 more police constables by the end of next year, and we're well on course to meet the Prime Minister's pledge for 5,000 more constables. Our British National Health Service, with treatment free at the point of delivery, is the envy of the world. I think it's the best system of healthcare that I've ever encountered. In every modern civilized society, the demand for better healthcare, for new techniques to save lives and improve our quality of life grows constantly and remorselessly. This government completely understands that. That's why we have increased spending by some 75% in real terms since 1979. And that's why the Prime Minister has pledged on our behalf more resources for the National Health Service in real terms every year throughout the next Parliament, a pledge to which, to my constant mystification, the Right Honourable Gentleman has not yet brought himself to match. But we're actually spending more money, and we're spending that money better as well, and that matters. We have reformed the National Health Service so it's much better managed and much more efficient. And it's no good opposing these improvements, because when waste is reduced, more can be directed to higher quality patient care. And that means that patients get more treatment and care out of every extra pound that we are spending. Now, for next year, we will increase current spending on patient services in the National Health Service by £1.6 billion, or 2.9% in real terms. The real increase in current spending for hospitals next year, over and above inflation, will be 3%. And on top of this, private finance initiative investment will play an increasingly important role in providing new healthcare facilities. The PFI contract for the Norfolk and Norwich Hospital scheme, worth close to £200 million, was signed yesterday, and others will follow. It is. I'm grateful to my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Health, for signing tomorrow, but I don't think he had the budget in mind. There are many in the pipeline. He had the people of Norfolk and Norwich in mind, and the efficiency and the investment in our National Health Service. PFI investment in the NHS will reach some £900 million over the next 3 years, on top of the increased public spending I'm announcing. And I think the party opposite have at last belatedly, I think, become converted to that source of investment in our great National Health Service. The NHS will continue to grow, and it will continue to improve. We're totally committed to the National Health Service as a public service providing high-quality, up-to-date treatment free at the point of delivery. But by our decisions on public spending, we as a government prove that the National Health Service remains at the top of this government's priorities. The National Health Service has been safe in our hands, it is safe in our hands, and it will always be safe in our hands. This year's spending realm was as tight as any I can remember. I keep describing it as eye-wateringly tight. But we've never lost sight of our objective, which is to sustain and improve the key public services that the British public care about: education, combating crime, and our National Health Service. In part, we've achieved that by increasing efficiency within the priority services. But inevitably, we've also had to find savings in other programs. Find out in a minute. Falling unemployment and lower inflation has helped to reduce social security and employment programs. We're also continuing to transfer activities to the private sector where this is more efficient, as it is for student loans. We refocused the housing programme to encourage the use of private finance and the transfer of the local authority housing stock to the private sector. We're stepping up our programs against fraud. We're continuing our remorseless squeeze on the costs of bureaucracy itself, and we've looked in every department for ways of achieving our objectives more economically. With efficiency savings, most departments will be able to deliver their programs next year, but with less public money in real terms. People pay their taxes in order to get good quality public services, not to accumulate state-owned buildings. And this simple truth has led to the development of the Private Finance Initiative, which I've just referred to in the context of health. PFI does help to square the circle of sound public finances and the growing demand for better and more modern public services by tapping the expertise and the resources of the private sector. A year ago, we had agreed £1.5 billion worth of deals. Now we've agreed £7 billion, and we're on course to deliver double that by March 1999. And time and again, the taxpayer is getting better value for money across a whole area of activities, road schemes, prisons, information technology projects, and so on. And reforms to local government rules are bringing the PFI into new areas, notably schools. If I may take one example where we are, London. London is currently experiencing a transport investment boom under the PFI. The Channel Tunnel Rail Link, Thames Link 2000, the Docklands Light Railway extension, and the A40 and the A13 improvements. That's in addition to conventional public and private capital spending on the Jubilee Line extension, the Heathrow Express, and the new A12 M11 Hackney Link. Investment in London Transport is now running at 50% in real terms above the average for the 1980s. London will soon become one of the biggest construction sites in the country. As a defiantly provincial Nottingham man, I can only say I hope London's an even nicer place when it's finished. But adding traditional capital spending to PFI investment, publicly sponsored capital spending in the United Kingdom in the next 3 years will be substantially higher in real terms than it was in the 1980s. Now, 1/3 of all public spending goes on social security. Our social security system is there to provide an income when people can't earn because of sickness, disability, unemployment, caring for relatives, or old age. People on the left and the right of politics continue to search for a radically different and better way of meeting these needs in our wealthy nation. Now, I've studied many of their proposals, studied them closely. So far, I'm afraid nobody's yet come up with anything remotely sensible or practicable. And until they do come up with a radical alternative, if they ever do, our welfare safety net must remain affordable. We must not allow the welfare state to damage the incentives of individuals or businesses in the private sector, because it's the wealth-creating enterprise economy that sustains the whole of our social security system. In the post-war period, social security has grown in real terms by around 5% each year. In recent budgets, we've taken action to bring that growth under control. We now expect future growth of 1.5% a year, well below the growth of the economy. Year after year, this government's also vigorously attacked fraud, and we've reformed benefits to target them on those in genuine need. And the measures I now propose in this budget intensify these efforts yet again. We plan a further move to align the benefits paid to lone parents and couples with children, because both care for children. From April 1998, new awards of family premium and child benefit will be the same in value for lone parents as for couples. And we're introducing a number of measures on housing benefit and council tax benefit to ensure that those on benefits don't have a more comfortable lifestyle than some of those who are supporting themselves on modest incomes. The contrary is most unfair and most unwise, and full details will be made available later today by my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Social Security, who, with your permission, Mr. Deputy Speaker, will speak later in the budget debate. In my budget 2 years ago, I announced a whole package of measures to help the unemployed get back to work, from improvements to the family credit system to national insurance holidays for employers taking on long-term unemployed people, and they're contributing to the steadily improving jobs position in this country. In this budget, I'm providing another £100 million worth of new money for new measures, mainly targeted on people who've been unemployed for 2 years or more. First, they'll be required to attend a compulsory programme of interviews with the Employment Service to give them a helping hand to compete in our ever-improving market for jobs. But we're also expanding project work pilots to a further 28 areas. This will create up to 100,000 new opportunities on a programme with a good track record for getting long-term unemployed people back to work. The pilots of it have been successful. I can also announce pilots for a new scheme called Contract for Work. Private contractors will help people to find work. These firms will be paid by results. As with project work, if the scheme works better than the existing approach, we'll expand it. We've drawn on some American experience, we'll adapt it to here, and if it works, we'll certainly put it into widespread application. We have to tackle this problem. Dependency on welfare impoverishes us all. The welfare system should provide a safety net. The welfare system must provide the support that a caring society wants to give to our less fortunate fellow citizens. But the welfare system must never be allowed to become a way of life. We don't want our social security system to be undermined by resentment. We have to take these careful measures. We have to move people from dependency into responsibility for themselves and their families, because we're serious about protecting those in genuine need, and we want to go on delivering that protection for the future. Now, we want to combine a strong, affordable welfare system with a successful, low-tax economy. And that means that when we spend money on Social Security, it must only go to those who actually need it. It also means that when we levy taxes, we must make sure they're paid and not evaded by those who ought to pay them. And as part of our continuing fight against tax and benefit fraud and against tax loopholes, I'm introducing a package of measures called Spend to Save. This involves planned spending of money carefully targeted to save much more money for the general public and to raise revenue. There'll be more money next year to clamp down on benefit fraud. There'll be more risks and checks on benefit claimants in high-risk groups, and the information we already have on benefit claimants will be used more effectively to catch cheats. Inland revenue tax experts will be redeployed to investigate even more rigorously how some big, sophisticated companies seem to pay so little taxation. They'll make sure that companies are paying what they owe and what we intend that they should owe. In short, we intend to do more about companies being economical with their tax. There'll be more resources in the revenue and customs to stem the growth of the shadow economy. Tax cheats put law-abiding small entrepreneurs out of business, and we all lose from that. There'll be more customs and excise officers to tackle value-added tax and other tax abuse, including yet more to target the smuggling of alcohol and tobacco. The Spend to Save package will cost £800 million over the next 3 years to secure, in a well-planned and measured way, revenue and expenditure savings of well over 8 times that amount, £6.7 billion. And these are additional measures to the effective steps we have previously taken. Spend to Save protects the ordinary taxpayer and the people in genuine need of benefits. It's certainly not about more bureaucracy or red tape. We remain a government committed to deregulation, and we're committed to a more efficient civil service. We have cut, overall, central government departments' running costs by 8% in real terms since the start of this Parliament, and we're going to reduce them by a further 7% by the end of the decade. Civil service numbers are already below 500,000, and we expect this fall to continue. Now, the first duty of government is to make sure that people can live their lives as they want and that businesses can flourish. People must have the opportunity of a good quality job to go to, a good standard of living, good schools and hospitals, and safe streets to live in. And it's only when those essentials are secure, and only when the government has made sure that it's not borrowing more than it should, that a responsible government can start to think about tax cuts. Last year, I cut taxes paid by the ordinary family, and this year, I'm able to cut a little more. And I think that the message I've repeated over recent months has now been understood. There are to be tax cuts. In my opinion, they must be for keeps. That means they must be backed not only by sound spending decisions, but also by a sound fiscal judgment. Consumer spending is strong and inflation remains in check. But a fiscal stimulus to the economy at this stage could be just as damaging as letting go of monetary policy. So in setting my budget, I've struck a careful balance. I want to cut taxes. But first, I have to continue my drive to secure the tax yield. I want to make sure that the tax due is turned into tax paid, and the balance of the tax burden must be distributed sensibly and fairly, and it mustn't distort decisions or competition. So I'm introducing a number of measures which will help to achieve this. And I'm plugging some loopholes to raise revenue. I'm ending some tax reliefs that have done their job to raise revenue. And I'm adjusting some indirect tax rates. Even though VAT revenues have revived in recent months, they're still coming in significantly below what was expected last year. And this budget includes a crackdown on some of the rather ingenious wheezers that have sprung up to get around paying VAT. The measures I'm announcing will raise £750 million in revenue next year, but they also protect a further £1.5 billion a year of existing revenue from further attack from ingenious accountants, acting lawfully, acting to take our revenue. Customs will restrict access to special VAT schemes for retailers. We'll also tighten up the rules of VAT relief schemes for bad debts and the option to tax commercial property to prevent widespread abuse of these reliefs. I also propose to take steps against retailers who reduce their VAT bills when selling insurance with their products. We've already announced a 3-year limit on repayments of VAT claims. This was a sensible, precautionary measure in the national interest, not just the Exchequer. Recent high-profile court cases have revealed the potential exposure of the Exchequer to claims, enormous claims for tax, going back to when VAT was first introduced. No responsible government could leave the Exchequer and ultimately all taxpayers exposed in that way. Government needs to strike a balance between what's fair to the individual taxpayer and what is fair to the whole body of other taxpayers. And the 3-year cap that I've announced strikes that balance. But one feature that attracted particular criticism, not only from accountants and their clients, but from others, was that Customs still retained the right to claim underpaid tax going back 6 years. The argument was actually, in my opinion, rather disingenuous because Customs don't claim underpaid tax on unexpected changes to the interpretation of the law when they go against taxpayers. However, government must not only be fair, it must be seen to be fair. And I've therefore decided that Customs' right to claim underpaid tax in cases where no fraud or malpractice is involved should be restricted to 3 years as well. I'll be releasing details today of a package of measures to stamp out tax abuse in a number of areas, including leasing transactions, the abuse of foreign tax credit rules, and paying employees in their own company's shares. And I'm sure that these will be accepted by the House and others as necessary and sensible measures to stem the growing loss of tax revenues and thereby to protect the ordinary taxpayer. I won't tolerate tax abuse, and a number of these measures are being introduced subject to the Finance Bill becoming law with effect from today. Special tax reliefs can be a powerful tool. They can play an important pump priming role, encouraging companies and individuals to change their behaviour in a way which benefits the wider economy. But by their very nature, they need to be used very selectively. We owe it, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to the ordinary taxpayer to keep each and every special tax relief we have under constant review to determine whether it's still justified or whether it's now served its useful purpose. The tax relief this government introduced in 1987 to promote profit-related pay schemes has been a success. It's played a key role in reinforcing this government's strong beliefs that employees' reward should depend on the success of the business for which they work. I've always believed, I've always argued publicly for many years that in a modern enterprise economy, people's pay should be closely linked to the performance of the business for which they work. The best way for businesses to motivate their staff is to let them share in the rewards of success. And I'm delighted that the tax reliefs have helped to get this idea accepted so widely. The tax relief on profit-related pay was always intended to be a pump-priming measure and was introduced in very different circumstances. Oh, yes. If I may quote what Nigel Lawson said in the Green Paper in 1986, I quote, "There's considerable inertia to overcome, so it might make sense to offer some temporary measure of tax relief." And I end the quote. Profit-related pay is now firmly established as part of British businesses' pay policy. It's one of the reasons for our success. Over 3.7 million people are in schemes. 10 years on, the temporary tax incentive has successfully served its pump-priming purpose. I can no longer justify the ever-increasing cost of the tax relief to the 22 million taxpayers who are not in profit-related pay schemes. We can't permanently divide the workforce into groups who pay different levels of tax on exactly the same earnings, depending on whether the firm they work for is in a scheme or not. The goal, the aim of the relief, that it should achieve widespread use of profit-related pay, has been achieved, and I'd rather make faster progress on lower taxes for everybody. We have changed the culture. Good managers in this enterprise economy today do not need a tax relief anymore to know that pay should be linked to their firm's performance. Pay linked to profits produces its own rewards on the bottom line in a thriving economy. So I therefore propose to describe to the House how the government will start to withdraw this special tax relief. I do intend to do this gradually, so I need to ensure that businesses need to adjust their pay packages and their sharing of the rewards of success, and they need to have ample time to make those adjustments. The upper limit of pay attracting the relief will remain unchanged at its present £4,000 until 1998. So that means that no one will be affected before then. It will then... But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, during the lifetime of a Conservative government. It will then be progressively reduced until the year 2000, when the relief will be withdrawn altogether. I turn now to investment, because investment's vital to our recovery, and business investment now growing strongly. The tax system recognises investment through capital allowances. These allow the cost of investment to be written off against tax bills frequently faster than it's written off in commercial accounts. But within that system, for plant and machinery with a long lifespan, the rate at which costs can be written off for tax is far more generous than for other types of investment, and it bears no relation to the useful economic life of the asset. And this is an unjustifiable distortion in the tax system in favour of particular types of business and investment. I propose changing the capital allowance for plant and machinery with a life of more than 25 years to 6% on a reducing balance basis. This will spread the tax relief more evenly over the average life of these assets. Groups spending less than £100,000 a year on such assets will be exempt. So this will mean that the vast majority of small companies will not be affected. Ships and railways will also be exempt. And I also propose to withdraw the 100% corporation tax reduction for the intangible costs of drilling most production oil wells. This government recognises that low marginal tax rates on income are a spur to hard work and enterprise. Taxes on spending do less damage to effort and enterprise than taxes on income. But the balance of the taxes that we do impose on spending must be right. And I'm making some changes to taxes which help to move towards a better balance for the tax system as a whole. I propose to increase insurance premium tax, which applies to most general insurance, to 4%. Three-quarters of all insurance, including life insurance and other long-term insurance, will remain exempt. Insurance remains undertaxed for consumers compared with other services in this country. The introduction of this tax, when I made it at a very low rate, didn't harm the healthy insurance industry that we have. Most companies absorbed the tax, and some premium actually fell for a time. Even after this further modest change, which I think is lower than many people expected, the overall rate of insurance premium tax in the United Kingdom remains very low, lower than in almost any other European Union country. Air travel has also been undertaxed because it's proved difficult, still proves difficult, to get international agreement to tax its fuel. The rates of air passenger duty are to be increased. The £5 rate on flights to most European countries will be increased to £10, and the £10 rate on flights to the rest of the world will be increased to £20. These increases will not come into effect until the 1st of November 1997 to give...
Labour again pointing out that that will happen after the election.
I realise, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that we're all thinking of a forthcoming election, but the reason the opposition can't produce a responsible economic policy is plainly because they're obsessive about it. The very good reason for delaying it till November 1997 is to give tour operators who have already sold their packages time to reflect these new rates in the prices they publish in their holiday brochures. I announce necessary things before an election. That is responsibility. That is what is totally lacking from that side of the House, who seem to propose to announce nothing whatever of any substance apart from a windfall tax this side of the election. Business travel is soaring, and the holiday business is booming at the moment in prosperous Britain. This modest change won't stop it booming in future prosperous years. About 40% of the revenue raised by airport passenger tax is borne by overseas visitors to this country. I'm making the same changes to the main vehicle excise duties this year as I did last year. Cost of a car tax disc will go up by £5, around the rate of inflation. The cost of a lorry tax disc will be frozen, and that's for the 7th year in succession. I firmly believe that motorists should bear the full costs of driving, not only wear and tear and congestion on the roads, but also the wider environmental costs. Even those of us who frequently have to drive, and contrary to rumours that ministers always travel in limousines, that includes most people in this House, we can take steps to cut fuel consumption, and we all ought to consider carefully the use of our cars. I intend to stick to my 1993 budget commitment to raise road fuel duties by an average of at least 5% each year in real terms. And in line with this, I'm raising the tax on all petrol and diesel by 3p per litre from 6 o'clock tonight. These tax rises will encourage fuel efficiency, and they'll help control harmful pollution. I'm glad to say that pollution from vehicles is already coming down, helped by tax measures in previous budgets. The tax measures that we took to encourage unleaded petrol were a huge success, and it now accounts for 2/3 of the petrol market. I want to go further in this budget for green purposes, or to put it more sensibly, to attack pollution in cities and improve air quality by effective steps to reduce particulate emissions, which is the smoke produced by diesel engines. In recent years, new evidence has come to light strengthening the health arguments for reducing particulates. Pollution is being reduced, but we all want to see it being reduced further and faster. Ultra-low sulfur diesel is cleaner than ordinary diesel, and it's slightly more expensive to produce. So I want to create the conditions where ultra-low sulfur diesel can cost the same at the pump as ordinary diesel. I've just said that I'm increasing the tax on diesel by the same amount as petrol. I plan to reduce the duty on ultra-low sulfur diesel by £0.01 a litre relative to ordinary diesel when I get the necessary international agreement. I also want to encourage high-mileage vehicles in our towns and cities to switch to cleaner gas power. Last year's budget changes broadly equalise the pump prices of liquid gas and petrol. From 6 o'clock tonight, I'm reducing the duty on road fuel gases by a further 25%. I also intend to reduce vehicle excise duty by up to £500 for lorries meeting very stringent emission standards from early 1998. This will give an incentive for lorry owners to fit particulate traps or to convert to gas power. We will be consulting on the practical details of these changes. I believe that this package, which is an air quality package, will significantly speed up the reduction of urban emissions of particulates, helping us to meet our air quality targets for 2005 and beyond. We intend to ensure that the economic growth which we are achieving faster than others in this country is consistent with a healthy environment and is consistent with sustainable development as we become one of the most successful economies in the Western world. In my 1993 budget, I gave a commitment to raise duty on tobacco by more than inflation each year. I accept it's a fair and effective way to hammer home the message smoking can seriously damage your health. So far as I'm concerned, this announcement is necessary masochism in the wider public interest. But from 6 o'clock this evening, the tax on a packet of 20 cigarettes will increase by about 15 pence, on a packet of small cigars by about 7 pence, and on a packet of pipe tobacco by about 8 pence. And I'm limiting the increase in the duty on hand-rolling tobacco to the rate of inflation. Hand-rolling tobacco is proving by far the easiest tobacco product to smuggle, although it does represent a very small part of the total tobacco market. I'm aware, not yet, I'm aware of the serious problem that cross-border shopping and smuggling of alcohol causes our drinks industry in Britain. And I've already announced that Customs are stepping up their efforts yet further to catch smugglers. Now, last year, I was able to freeze the duty rate on beer and wine. This year, it will remain frozen. The proportion of tax on the price of a pint in the pub is now at its lowest level for 30 years. And for some of us, that helps to keep our small cigars affordable. Last year's cut in the duty on spirits was the first cut that any Chancellor had made for 100 years. I was tempted to maintain a striking rate of once every 100 years. But I'm sure the industry will be glad to know they won't have to wait so long this time. From 6 o'clock tonight, the tax on whiskey, gin and other spirits will fall by another 4%, worth 26 pence a bottle. And Cabinet, the reduction in the rate on spirits boosts an important industry in the United Kingdom. It also reinforced last year's signal to overseas authorities not to discriminate against our products. Only smugglers will regret that we're slowly moving our duty on spirits nearer to the continental level. From the 1st of January, the tax on alcoholic soft drinks will be increased by over 40%. But it puts up the price by over 7 and 8 pence a bottle for those who've not yet tried them. This will meet public concern about the attraction of these alco pops for underage drinkers, but actually also attack a distortion of competition by bringing the tax broadly in line with beer. And you'll notice that I've considered the balance of my overall package on this subject carefully. I haven't yet been converted to a bubblegum flavoured alco pop myself. Nothing matters more for business than a stable economic environment, low interest rates and low inflation. And businesses throughout Britain are benefiting from the healthy, sustainable growth in the economy that I've described today. As I promised in my last budget, from April 1997 there'll be a cut in the main rate of employers' national insurance contributions to 10%. That'll be paid for by the proceeds we're getting from the landfill tax. A tax on waste is cutting a tax on jobs. And this will benefit employers in Britain and make it even cheaper to create new jobs in our growing economy. Our overheads on jobs are already less than half of those in Germany, France or Italy. And I'm determined that we've got to keep that advantage over our continental competitors, where the creation of new jobs in the rest of the European Union is over-regulated and it's overpriced. And that's another reason why I'm confident, a practical reason for being confident that our unemployment will keep falling. In this budget, I propose to keep the 3 intermediate thresholds for employers' national insurance contributions where they are now. I propose to increase by £10 and £1 respectively the upper and lower earnings thresholds for employers and employees' national insurance contributions. In this budget, I also want to address a particular concern of our small businesses upon whom so much of our future economic prosperity depends. And I think they're most concerned about the burden of non-domestic rates. The uniform business rate's a fixed cost which can rise each year beyond the control of the manager of any business, and it hits the small business hard. Since the last revaluation of business rates, I've repeatedly slowed down the increase of rates for those businesses whose rates have had to go up. No business property has seen its rates go up by more than 7.5% above inflation in any one year since the last revaluation. But I want to do more than that. That is not good enough. I have decided to freeze next year's rates bill for all the small businesses whose rates would have gone up. Small properties whose rates are falling will have those reductions accelerated. This will benefit over 1 million small business properties by up to £130 a year. And I want to go further. A freeze is an important step, significant step, and I can make that straight away this year. We've already reduced business rates for rural village shops, but I realise that the present system of business rates bears particularly hard on the smaller businesses for whom they represent a much bigger proportion of total costs compared with their large competitors. We must therefore move on as soon as possible to make more changes in the system to recognise this and to redistribute the burden more sensibly between smaller and larger businesses. We'll proceed to do that, and my budget next year will be a convenient opportunity to do so. This government's committed to reducing and then abolishing capital gains tax and inheritance tax, and I repeat those commitments. But we've always said that we'll cut these taxes only when we can afford to do so. This is a responsible budget which is protecting future growth and prosperity by putting the public finances into a healthier state. And we won't be able to make progress on both those taxes this year. But I am pleased to announce that we can come back next year and discover, I would say, from the seat which the Honourable Member is now occupying, he will find out. But I'm pleased to announce that we can take a further significant step towards abolishing inheritance tax. Inheritance tax is actually nowadays a penalty on thrift, independence and enterprise. It's a growing anachronism. Lloyd George Maxim, when he said that the most convenient time to tax the rich is when they're dead, no longer holds in modern society. Inheritance tax today is largely paid by people of modest means, who either cannot or simply do not make careful plans to avoid it. Modest means, in the opinion of all those outside the hardcore of the Labour movement, that is. Last year I made significant progress towards our commitment. In this budget I will build on that by raising the value of the inheritance tax threshold to £215,000.
Only 200,000.
Know that from this morning. Does he also aware this government has therefore now raised that threshold by 40%, 40%, in only 2 years? In last year's budget speech, I announced a project to rewrite inland revenue tax legislation in plain English. As a tall order, this project's about as ambitious as translating the whole of War and Peace into lucid Swahili, but well, in fact, it's more ambitious. I'm told that War and Peace is only 1,500 pages long. Inland revenue tax law is 6,000 pages long, and it wasn't written by a Tolstoy. But we've consulted extensively on how the project should be carried out, and I'm glad to say there is wide consensus. The Inland Revenue will publish the plans and arrangements shortly after the budget. The aim is to prepare a series of rewrite bills, the first of them to be ready for enactment in the 1997 to 98 session. My noble and learned friend Lord Howe has produced a thorough and helpful report on how Parliament might handle these bills. We endorse his broad proposals and invite the Procedure Committee to consider how the House is going to handle the bills in that fashion. And I can announce that my noble and learned friend Lord Howe has agreed to chair the steering committee which will oversee the rewrite project. The project will bring the benefits of clarity and certainty to businesses and ordinary taxpayers. It's been widely welcomed and it deserves the continuing support that it has enjoyed in all parts of this House. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this government has led Britain towards our clear goal of a low-tax economy where private enterprise has the incentive to generate jobs, investment and wealth to make people and their families more prosperous. We're moving towards a low-tax economy where individual living standards continue to rise and the government can afford the excellent public services that people want. Low direct taxes are the most effective way to encourage enterprise and hard work, a message to which we haven't converted the other party, but one which they no longer dare to deny. Under this government, those who do an honest day's work and those who take entrepreneurial risk will keep more of what they earn and save by their own efforts. This year, people have taken more heed of my speeches on the overriding priority for this year of securing future prosperity and jobs and financing key public services. Sensible people already expect my cuts in direct taxation to be modest before they read the one leak and many guesses this morning. They know their well-being depends on lasting growth and more jobs and that living standards rise from a combination of steadily rising incomes in a successful economy and steadily lowering taxes. Tax cuts matter a lot to low-paid people and to men and women in ordinary jobs. And I announced my income tax cuts last year as a return to our tax-cutting agenda. And for the second year in succession, as a result of all the steps that I have announced, I'm able to afford to deliver an instalment of that agenda. The choice is how. How best to deliver. It's the old dilemma. Do you go for thresholds or do you go for rates? And today, I suppose I'd say, do you go for the Guardian or do you go for the Mirror? Do you go for the Independent or do you go for the Sun? Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I want to ensure that tax doesn't start to be paid at all at too low a level of income. And I want to improve work incentives. So therefore, I propose to raise the threshold below which no income tax is paid at all. In this budget, I'm making an increase in the basic personal allowance of £280. Let me put this in context. That is 3.5 times more than necessary to cover the rate of inflation. And it will also ensure that each and every person who pays any income tax at all will get a direct benefit out of this budget. I'm also increasing the married couples and the related allowances by £40, maintaining the extra tax allowance that does go to all married couples. It will now be worth nearly £275 each year for couples who are married. The tax system does recognise marriage, contrary to popular belief. We also give a special tax allowance to blind people. This year I'm increasing that by the rate of inflation, but I'm also moving to put indexation of this allowance onto the same statutory basis as for the other income tax allowances. I also propose to raise the threshold above which people start to pay the 40p rate, higher rate tax by £600. Now, one of this government's most important pleasures is that we will move to a basic rate of income tax of 20p as soon as we can. Now, we're proving that we can move towards the delivery of the promise and still deliver healthy public finances. Every step we take makes it more and more credible. Every step that we take makes it more affordable to reach the ultimate goal which we are getting tantalisingly near to and which a Conservative government will achieve. And as a further step towards that, I propose to widen the lower rate band of 20 pence tax by £200, and that's twice as much as required to meet inflation. And that will mean that the slice of income on which a 20 pence tax rate is paid will have more than doubled during the lifetime of this Parliament. More than 1 in 4, more than a quarter of all taxpayers now will only pay a marginal rate of tax at 20 pence in the pound. Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, why thresholds? Were the newspapers wrong? Am I indeed going to cut a penny off the basic rate of income tax? Well, what the newspapers didn't know, at least, was that my control of public spending and borrowing and the responsibility of my budget as a whole means I can raise thresholds. I can widen the 20 pence band, and actually I can also responsibly afford to take down income tax as well. If I put it all on the rates, I actually could have taken 2